Girl calls 911 about her mom and sister. Cops are shocked when they discover the horrifying truth. Officer Sarah Martinez sat in her patrol car, sipping lukewarm coffee as she scanned the quiet suburban streets of Millbrook. At 32, Sarah was a seasoned cop with a reputation for handling sensitive cases with compassion and skill. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her brown eyes missed nothing as they swept across the peaceful neighborhood. Growing up in a family of immigrants, Sarah had always felt drawn to protecting the vulnerable. She'd seen firsthand how easy it was for people to fall through the cracks of society, and she'd vowed to make a difference. Her choice to become a police officer had initially disappointed her parents, who had hoped she'd pursue a safer, more prestigious career. But over time, they had come to respect her dedication and the positive impact she had on their community. Sarah's partner, Officer Mike Davidson, was nearing retirement. At 58, Mike had seen it all in his 3 decades on the force. His graying hair and weathered face told stories of countless nights on patrol and difficult cases solved. While he sometimes butted heads with Sarah over her softer approach to policing, he couldn't deny her effectiveness. As they patrolled the streets of Millbrook, neither Sarah nor Mike could have anticipated the call that was about to come in. A call that would challenge everything they thought they knew about family, duty, and the thin line between right and wrong. Across town, in a modest 2-story house on Elm Street, 10-year-old Emma Thompson sat huddled in her closet, her small hand clutching her mother's old cell phone. Tears streamed down her freckled face as she tried to gather the courage to do what she knew she had to do. Her long red hair was tangled, and her green eyes were wide with fear and determination. Emma had always been mature for her age, a fact her mother often remarked upon with pride. But the events of the past few hours had forced her to grow up faster than any child should. As she stared at the glowing numbers on the phone's keypad, Emma thought about her little sister Lily and steeled her resolve. Outside Emma's closet, the Thompson house was eerily quiet. In the kitchen, unwashed dishes filled the sink, evidence of the normal family dinner that had taken place just hours ago. Family photos lined the walls, showing smiling faces that betrayed no hint of the darkness that had descended upon the household. As the clock ticked past midnight, Emma took a deep breath and dialed 911. The decision she was about to make would set in motion a chain of events that would change her life and the lives of everyone around her forever. The night shift at Millbrook Police Department was usually quiet, but everything changed when the 911 operator received a call from a young, trembling voice. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked, her trained ear immediately picking up on the caller's distress. I need help, Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. My mom, she did something terrible to my sister. The operator's fingers flew across the keyboard, alerting available units as she tried to keep the young caller calm and gather more information. Sweetie, can you tell me your name and where you are? I'm Emma Thompson. I'm at 1542 Elm Street, the girl replied, her voice shaking. Please hurry. I'm scared. Within minutes, the call was patched through to Officers Martinez and Davidson, who were nearest to the location. Sarah felt her heart rate quicken as she listened to the dispatcher relay the information. Possible domestic incident involving a minor at 1542 Elm Street. Caller is a young girl reporting her mother may have harmed her sister. Approach with caution. Mike flipped on the sirens as Sarah accelerated, both officers' minds racing with possibilities. They had handled domestic calls before, but something about this one felt different, more urgent. As they pulled up to the Thompson house, everything seemed quiet. Too quiet for a house where something terrible had allegedly happened. Sarah and Mike exchanged a glance, years of partnership allowing them to communicate wordlessly. They approached the front door, hands near their weapons, senses on high alert. Sarah knocked firmly. Millbrook Police. We're responding to a 911 call. Is everyone okay in there? Silence. Mike tried the doorknob and found it unlocked. They entered cautiously, announcing their presence again. The house was dark, save for a faint light coming from upstairs. As they cleared the first floor, Sarah noticed the family photos on the walls. A mother and 2 young girls smiled back at her, looking for all the world like a happy, normal family, What had gone wrong here? Upstairs, a muffled sob caught their attention. Sarah approached a closed door, presumably a bedroom, while Mike covered her. "Emma, are you in there? It's the police. You're safe now." The door creaked open slightly, revealing a terrified Emma. Her eyes were red from crying, and she clutched a stuffed animal tightly to her chest. "You have to help Lily," she pleaded. "Mom heard her. She's in the bathroom. I think she's dead." Sarah felt her blood run cold. She knelt down to Emma's level, speaking softly. "Emma, you did the right thing by calling us. Can you tell me where your mom is now?" "She left," Emma whispered. After Lily, she just left." Mike was already moving towards the bathroom, his experienced eyes scanning for any signs of danger. Sarah stayed with Emma, trying to keep her calm while also gathering crucial information. "Emma, I need you to be brave for just a little longer, okay? Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Emma's lower lip trembled as she recounted the events of the evening. "Mom was acting weird all day. She kept saying Lily was sick, that she needed to be cleansed. I didn't understand. Then after dinner, she took Lily to the bathroom. I heard Lily screaming, but Mom told me to stay in my room. When it got quiet, I snuck out and I saw. Emma broke down sobbing, unable to continue. Sarah's mind raced, trying to piece together what might have happened. A mentally ill mother? A tragic accident? Or something even more sinister? Mike's voice cut through the tension. "Sarah, you need to see this, now." Sarah turned to Emma. "Sweetie, I need you to stay right here, okay? Officer Mike and I are going to check on Lily. We'll be right back." As Sarah approached the bathroom, she braced herself for what she might find. But nothing could have prepared her for the scene that awaited her. The bathroom was dimly lit by flickering candles, their sweet scent mixing nauseatingly with the metallic smell of blood. In the center of the room, the bathtub was filled with what looked like water, rose petals, and something else. And there, floating amidst it all, was the pale, lifeless body of a young girl. Sarah felt her professional detachment slipping as she took in the ritualistic setup, the symbols drawn on the walls in what appeared to be blood. This was no ordinary crime scene. This was something much darker, much more complex than anything she had encountered before. As Mike called for backup and forensics, Sarah knew that this case would change everything. The quiet night in Millbrook had just become the beginning of a nightmare that would test her skills, her beliefs, and her very understanding of human nature. As the forensics team swarmed the Thompson house, Sarah found herself struggling to maintain her composure. The bathroom scene was like something out of a horror movie, but the reality of it, the small, lifeless body in the tub, was far more horrifying than any fiction. The lead forensic investigator, Dr. Amelia Chen, approached Sarah with a grim expression. "Officer Martinez, you need to see this," she said, gesturing for Sarah to follow her back into the bathroom. Sarah steeled herself as she re-entered the room. Dr. Chen pointed to several markings on the walls, symbols that Sarah didn't recognize. "These aren't random," Dr. Chen explained. "They're consistent with certain occult practices. And the setup of the scene, it looks like some kind of ritual sacrifice." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Ritual sacrifice? In quiet, suburban Millbrook? It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was right in front of her. As they continued to process the scene, more disturbing details emerged. The water in the bathtub was actually a mixture of water, rose petals, and what appeared to be milk and honey, elements often associated with purification rituals in various cultures. Lily's body showed no obvious signs of violence, but there were strange markings drawn on her skin in what looked like henna. The most chilling discovery came when they found Mrs. Strang Thompson's journal hidden in a locked drawer in the master bedroom. The entries over the past few months showed a descent into paranoia and religious fanaticism. The most recent entry, dated that very day, read, "The time has come. Lily must be sacrificed to cleanse our family of sin. Only through her pure soul can we achieve salvation." As Sarah read these words, she felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a murder. It was a mother who had convinced herself that killing her own child was a righteous act. But the revelations didn't stop there. As they continued to search the house, Mike made a startling discovery in the basement. Hidden behind a false wall, they found a small room filled with occult paraphernalia. books on ancient rituals, strange artifacts, and what looked like altar. "Sarah," Mike called out, his voice tight with tension, "you need to see this." Sarah descended the stairs, her mind still reeling from everything they had uncovered. But what she saw in the basement room made her blood run cold. Pinned to the wall were dozens of newspaper clippings and photographs. Some were of the Thompson family, but others showed different families, different children, and each child's photo was marked with a red X. This wasn't her first, Sarah whispered, the horrible realization dawning on her. Lily wasn't the first child she... Oh God, the implications were staggering. If Mrs. Thompson had done this before, how many other children had suffered? How had this gone undetected for so long? As Sarah stared at the wall of victims, another thought struck her. A memory of Emma's words from earlier. Mom kept saying Lily was sick, that she needed to be cleansed. With growing horror, Sarah realized that Emma might have been next. If she hadn't been brave enough to call 911, who knows what might have happened? The case had just blown wide open, transforming from a tragic domestic incident into something far more sinister. Sarah knew that the real work was only just beginning. They had to find Mrs. Thompson, and quickly, before she could harm anyone else. As Sarah climbed the stairs to brief her superior, she felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. This case would test her like nothing before, forcing her to confront the darkest aspects of human nature and her own capacity for handling such evil. The quiet night in Millbrook had revealed a darkness no one could have anticipated, and Sarah knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Sarah stood in the captain's office, her mind still reeling from the horrors she had witnessed at the Thompson house. Captain James Roberts, a veteran of the force with salt and pepper hair and a perpetual frown, listened intently as Sarah laid out the details of the case. "So, we're not just dealing with a single homicide," the captain summarized, his voice grave. "We're potentially looking at a series of ritual killings across multiple jurisdictions." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, sir. And Mrs. Thompson is still out there. We have no idea if she's planning to continue her mission." Captain Roberts leaned back in his chair, his frown deepening. "This is way beyond our usual scope, Martinez. I'm going to have to call in the feds on this one." Sarah felt a flicker of resistance at the idea. This was her case, her city. But she knew the captain was right. This was too big for their small-town police force to handle alone. "Sir," Sarah said, straightening her posture, "I'd like to request to stay on the case. I know we'll be cooperating with federal agents, but I was first on the scene. I've talked to Emma. I need to see this through." The captain studied her for a long moment. "You sure about this, Martinez? This isn't going to be an easy case. It could take a toll on you." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm sure, sir. Someone needs to be a voice for Lily and all the other victims. I want to be that voice." Captain Roberts nodded slowly. "All right, you'll be our liaison with the feds. But I'm warning you, Martinez, don't let this consume you. And if I think for 1 second that you're getting too close to this, I'll pull you off. Understood?" "Understood, sir. Thank you." As Sarah left the captain's office, she felt a mix of determination and apprehension. She knew she had just committed herself to what could be the most challenging case of her career. The decision to stay on the case would have far-reaching consequences, not just for her professionally, but personally as well. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The FBI sent a team of agents specializing in occult crimes, led by the no-nonsense agent Diane Foster. Sarah found herself working long hours, poring over evidence, and trying to piece together Mrs. Thompson's movements. The consequences of her decision to stay on the case began to manifest in various ways. Sarah's sleep was plagued by nightmares of Lily's lifeless body and the wall of victims in the basement. She found herself growing distant from friends and family, unable to share the horrors she was dealing with daily. Her partner Mike noticed the change in her. "Sarah," he said one day as they were reviewing case files, "you need to take a step back. You're letting this consume you." But Sarah couldn't step back. Every time she thought about taking a break, she remembered Emma's terrified face, Lily's body in the bathtub, and all the other potential victims out there. She had made a commitment, and she was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The the case took an unexpected turn when they discovered that Mrs. Thompson had been part of a larger cult. The symbols found in the Thompson house matched those used by a secretive group known as the Purifiers. This revelation opened up new avenues of investigation, but also made their task more daunting. They weren't just looking for one disturbed individual, but potentially a network of fanatics. As they delved deeper into the cult's activities, Sarah found herself facing ethical dilemmas she had never encountered before. The line between right and wrong, always so clear in her mind, began to blur. When they discovered that a respected community leader was involved with the cult, Sarah had to grapple with the knowledge that bringing him down could destabilize the entire town. The stress of the case began to take a toll on Sarah's health. She lost weight, developed insomnia, and found herself jumping at shadows. Her decision to stay on the case had completely altered the course of her life. But there were positive consequences too. Sarah's dedication and insights earned her the respect of the FBI team. Agent Foster, initially skeptical of working with a small-town cop, came to rely heavily on Sarah's intuition and knowledge of the local community. Most importantly, Sarah's commitment to the case gave hope to the families of the victims. When they finally identified some of the children from the photos in Mrs. Thompson's basement, Sarah was the one who contacted the families. It was heart-wrenching work, but the gratitude in the parents' eyes reminded Sarah why she had made the decision to stay on the case. As the investigation progressed, Sarah realized that her decision had set her on a path from which there was no turning back. She was no longer just a police officer doing her job. She had become an advocate for the victims, a hunter of dark truths, and a protector of the innocent in a way she had never been before. The consequences of her decision were reshaping her life and her understanding of the world. But as she pinned another lead to the evidence board, Sarah knew that despite the toll it was taking, she had made the right choice. She was exactly where she needed to be, doing the work that needed to be done. The road ahead would be difficult, but Sarah was prepared to face whatever challenges came her way in her quest for justice. While Sarah and the FBI team focused on tracking down Mrs. Thompson and unraveling the cult's activities, a secondary plot began to unfold around Emma, the young girl who had made the fateful 911 call. In the aftermath of that terrible night, Emma had been placed in emergency foster care with the Johnsons, a couple well known in Millbrook for their work with traumatized children. Mary and David Johnson had opened their home to Emma, providing her with a safe and nurturing environment as she grappled with the loss of her sister and the betrayal by her mother. Initially, Emma was withdrawn and silent, the trauma of what she had witnessed leaving her unable to connect with those around her. But slowly, under the patient care of the Johnsons and with the help of a skilled child psychologist, Dr. Lisa Chen, Emma began to emerge from her shell. As Emma started to open up, Dr. Chen made a startling discovery. Through their therapy sessions, it became clear that Emma possessed an extraordinary emotional intelligence and resilience. Despite the horror she had experienced, Emma showed a remarkable capacity for empathy and understanding. "It's as if she can see right through to the heart of things," Dr. Chen remarked to Mary Johnson after a particularly intense session. "She understands complex emotional dynamics in a way that's rare even in adults." This unique perspective made Emma an unexpected asset to the investigation. During her interviews with the police and FBI, Emma was able to provide insights into her mother's behavior and the cult's practices that adults might have missed. Her innocent yet penetrating observations often led to breakthroughs in the case. However, Emma's involvement in the investigation raised ethical concerns. Sarah, in particular, struggled with the idea of putting the young girl through more trauma by asking her to relive her experiences. "She's been through enough," Sarah argued during a tense meeting with Agent Foster. "We can't keep dragging her into this." Agent Foster, while sympathetic, saw Emma as a crucial witness. "I understand your concerns, Officer Martinez, but Emma's testimony could be the key to bringing down this entire cult. We need her." As the debate over Emma's role in the case continued, another aspect of the secondary plot emerged. Emma's father, Jake Thompson, who had been estranged from the family for years, suddenly reappeared, demanding custody of his daughter. Jake's arrival complicated matters significantly. On one hand, he seemed genuinely concerned for Emma's welfare and horrified by what his ex-wife had done. On the other hand, his long absence and sudden reappearance raised suspicions among the investigative team. "We need to consider the possibility that he's connected to the cult," Sarah pointed out during a strategy meeting. "His timing is too convenient." As they delved into Jake's background, they uncovered a complex history. He had left the family years ago after a bitter argument with Mrs. Thompson over her increasing involvement in fringe religious groups. But there were gaps in his story, periods of time unaccounted for that coincided with suspected cult activities in other parts of the country. The question of Emma's future became intertwined with the larger investigation. Was Jake a concerned father looking to protect his daughter? Or was he a potential threat connected to the very cult they were trying to bring down? This secondary plot added layers of complexity to the case, forcing Sarah and the team to balance their focus between tracking down Mrs. Thompson and the cult leaders and ensuring Emma's safety and well-being. It also raised larger questions about family, trust, and the long-lasting impact of trauma on children. As this subplot developed, it became clear that Emma's story was not just a sidebar to the main investigation, but a crucial element that could potentially hold the key to unraveling the entire case. As the investigation progressed, the relationships between the key players in this unfolding drama began to evolve in unexpected ways. Sarah found herself growing increasingly protective of Emma. What had started as a professional concern for a key witness had developed into a deep, almost maternal bond. She found excuses to visit Emma at the Johnsons' home, bringing small gifts and spending time just talking with the young girl. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch swing, Emma turned to Sarah with her unnervingly perceptive gaze. "You're sad," she said simply. "Not just about my mom and Lily, but about something else." Sarah was taken aback by Emma's insight. She had been struggling with feelings of guilt and inadequacy, questioning whether she could have prevented Lily's death if she had somehow noticed something earlier. "You're right," Sarah admitted. "I am sad. And sometimes I feel like I failed you and Lily." Emma's small hand found Sarah's, squeezing it gently. "You didn't fail us. You're trying to make it right. That's what matters." This moment marked a turning point in their relationship. Sarah realized that while she had been trying to protect Emma, the young girl was also, in her own way, helping Sarah heal. Meanwhile, Sarah's relationship with Agent Foster was evolving from one of professional rivalry to mutual respect and even friendship. Initially, they had clashed over investigative methods and jurisdictional issues. But as they worked side by side, often pulling all-nighters poring over evidence, they developed a rhythm and understanding. One night, as they shared a much-needed coffee break, Foster opened up to Sarah. "You know, I wasn't thrilled about working with local LEOs on this case," she admitted. "But you've proved me wrong, Martinez. Your insight, your dedication, it's impressive." Sarah felt a warm glow of pride at Foster's words. "Thanks," she said. "I've learned a lot from you too. I never thought I'd be working a case like this." As they continued to talk, sharing stories from their careers and personal lives, Sarah realized that she had found not just a colleague, but a friend who understood the unique pressures and challenges of their work. The relationship between Emma and her father, Jake, was perhaps the most complex and fraught with tension. After years of absence, Jake was trying to rebuild a connection with his daughter, but the process was far from smooth. During supervised visits, Jake would try to engage Emma, bringing her favorite books and toys from her childhood. Emma, however, remained guarded, her trust shattered by her mother's actions. "Why did you leave us?" Emma asked during one visit, her voice small but steady. Jake's face crumpled with guilt and regret. I made a mistake, Emma. I thought I was protecting you by leaving, but I was wrong. I should have fought harder to keep you safe." As Emma processed her father's words, Sarah and the team watched carefully, alert for any signs that Jake might be manipulating the situation. But over time, it became clear that Jake's remorse and love for his daughter were genuine. The developing relationship between Jake and Emma added another layer of complexity to the case. Sarah found herself in the difficult position of supporting their reconnection, while also maintaining professional suspicion about Jake's potential involvement with the cult. Perhaps the most surprising relationship development was between Sarah and her partner, Mike. The stress and intensity of the case had initially driven a wedge between them, with Mike worried about Sarah's growing obsession. But as the investigation deepened, Mike's protective instincts kicked in. He became Sarah's staunchest supporter, watching her back and providing a steady presence when the horrors of the case threatened to overwhelm her. One particularly tough day, after interviewing a cult member who had graphically described a ritual sacrifice, Sarah broke down in the precinct parking lot. Without a word, Mike enveloped her in a bear hug, letting her sob against his chest. "I've got you, partner," he murmured. "You're not alone in this." At that moment, Sarah realized how much she had come to rely on Mike's unwavering support. Their partnership, tested by the strains of the case, had emerged stronger than ever. As these relationships continued to develop and deepen, they formed a complex web of support, tension, and interdependence. Each connection, Sarah and Emma, Sarah and Foster, Emma and Jake, Sarah and Mike, added depth and nuance to the unfolding story, influencing the course of the investigation in subtle but significant ways. The bonds forged in the crucible of this case would prove to be both a source of strength and a potential vulnerability as they moved closer to confronting the dark heart of the cult and the truth behind Mrs. Thompson's actions. The investigation reached its climactic point on a stormy night 6 months after Lily's death. A breakthrough in the case had led Sarah, Agent Foster, and a joint task force to an abandoned summer camp on the outskirts of Millbrook. Intelligence suggested that the cult, the Purifiers, was gathering for a major ritual, one that potentially involved more child sacrifices. As rain lashed against the windshield of their unmarked vehicle, Sarah felt her heart racing. This was it. The moment they had been working towards for months. The chance to stop the cult and bring Mrs. Thompson to justice was finally within reach. "Remember," Agent Foster's voice crackled over the radio, "our primary objective is to secure any potential victims. Mrs. Thompson is a secondary target. Move in quietly and be prepared for anything." The task force spread out, surrounding the dilapidated camp buildings. Sarah and Mike approached the main lodge, water soaking through their tactical gear. Through the grimy windows, they could see flickering candlelight and moving shadows. Suddenly, a child's scream pierced the night. Without hesitation, Sarah burst through the door, Mike right behind her. The scene that greeted them was like something out of a nightmare. Robed figures surrounded an altar where a young boy lay bound, Mrs. Thompson standing over him with a ritualistic dagger raised high. "FBI, drop your weapons!" Agent Foster's voice boomed as she and her team stormed in from another entrance. Chaos erupted. Some cult members surrendered immediately, while others fought back. Sarah's focus remained on Mrs. Thompson, who had grabbed the boy and was backing towards a rear exit. "Emily, stop!" Sarah called out, using Mrs. Thompson's first name in an attempt to break through to her. "It's over. Let the boy go." For a moment, Mrs. Thompson hesitated, her eyes wild and unfocused. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "The sacrifice must be completed. It's the only way to cleanse the sin from this world." Sarah inched closer, her gun trained on Mrs. Thompson, but her voice steady and calm. "Think about Emma, Emily. Think about Lily. This isn't what they would want. You can still make this right." At the mention of her daughters, something shifted in Mrs. Thompson's expression. The dagger in her hand wavered. In that split second of hesitation, Sarah made her move. She lunged forward, tackling Mrs. Thompson to the ground. The dagger skittered across the floor as Sarah quickly subdued and handcuffed the cult leader. As the dust settled, Sarah looked around the room. Most of the cult members were in custody, and the boy from the altar was being tended to by paramedics. They had done it. They had stopped the ritual and saved a life. But the victory felt hollow as Sarah gazed into Mrs. Thompson's vacant eyes. This woman, who had once been a loving mother, was now a shell of herself, consumed by madness and fanaticism. As they led Mrs. Thompson out of the building, the rain had stopped, and a sliver of moon peeked through the clouds. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders, even as new questions arose in her mind. The cult had been stopped, but at what cost? How many lives had been shattered in the process? And how could they begin to heal the wounds left behind by the Purifiers? As the red and blue lights of police vehicles illuminated the night, Sarah knew that while this climactic event marked the end of one chapter, it was far from the end of the story. The real work, the work of healing and understanding, was only just beginning. In the wake of the raid on the cult compound, Sarah and the investigative team faced the daunting task of unraveling the full extent of the Purifier's activities and bringing all those involved to justice. The conflict, far from being resolved with Mrs. Thompson's arrest, had only grown more complex. The days following the raid were a whirlwind of activity. Interrogations of cult members revealed a network far more extensive than they had initially believed. The cult had tentacles reaching into several states, with members in positions of power and influence. Sarah found herself working around the clock, coordinating with multiple law enforcement agencies and sifting through mountains of evidence. The strain was beginning to show, dark circles forming under her eyes as she pushed herself to her limits. One afternoon, as she was poring over financial records linked to the cult, Agent Foster approached her desk. "Martinez," she said, her tone uncharacteristically gentle, "we need to talk." Sarah looked up, blinking away her fatigue. "What's up?" Foster pulled up a chair. "You're burning out, Sarah. I've seen it happen to good agents before. You need to take a step back." Sarah bristled at the suggestion. "I'm fine. We're so close to cracking this thing wide open. I can't stop now." "You can, and you will," Foster said firmly. "That's an order. Take the weekend off, get some rest. We need you at your best for what's coming." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed. As she drove home that evening, she realized it was the first time in months she had left the precinct before midnight. The enforced break gave Sarah time to reflect on the case and their attempts at resolution. They had saved lives and brought key cult members to justice, but the roots of the problem went deeper. The cult had preyed on vulnerable people, offering them a sense of purpose and belonging. How could they address those underlying issues? Sarah's thoughts turned to Emma. The young girl had been instrumental in helping them understand the cult's psychology, but at what cost to her own healing process? Sarah made a mental note to check in with Emma's therapist and ensure she was getting the support she needed. As she pondered these questions, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was Jake Thompson, Emma's father. "Officer Martinez," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "I need your help. It's about Emma." Sarah felt her heart rate quicken. "What's wrong? Is she okay?" Jake sighed heavily. "Physically, yes, but she's struggling. The therapist thinks Emma might have been more involved in the cult activities than we realized. Not willingly, of course, but..." The implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah's mind raced. If Emma had been forced to participate in cult rituals, it could explain her deep understanding of their practices. It could also mean that the trauma she had experienced was even more profound than they had imagined. "I'll be right there," Sarah said, already reaching for her keys. When she arrived at the Johnsons' house, she found Emma curled up on the couch, looking smaller and more vulnerable than Sarah had ever seen her. Jake sat nearby, his face etched with worry. "Emma," Sarah said softly, kneeling in front of the girl, "can you tell me what's going on?" Emma's eyes, usually so bright and perceptive, were dull with pain. "I remembered something," she whispered. "Something bad." Over the next hour, with gentle prompting from Sarah and support from Jake, Emma revealed a series of repressed memories. She had been present for some of the cult's smaller rituals, her mother insisting it was for her own protection and purification. The guilt and confusion Emma felt were palpable. As Sarah listened, she realized that their attempts at conflict resolution had been too narrow. They had focused on the legal and procedural aspects of dismantling the cult, but had perhaps underestimated the psychological toll on its victims, especially the children. "Emma," Sarah said once the girl had finished speaking, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. None of this was your fault. You did nothing wrong. Your mom, she was very sick, and she made bad choices. But you are brave and strong, and we're going to help you through this." Emma nodded, a glimmer of her old spirit returning to her eyes. "Can I help other kids? Kids like me?" Sarah exchanged a glance with Jake, seeing her own surprise mirrored in his face. Even after everything she had been through, Emma's first thought was for others. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Sarah said. "In fact, I think you just helped me figure something out." As she drove back to the precinct that night, Sarah's mind was buzzing with new ideas. Their conflict resolution approach needed to be more holistic. Yes, they needed to prosecute the cult members and dismantle their network, but they also needed to focus on healing and prevention. Sarah began to outline a plan. It involved creating a task force dedicated to supporting cult victims, especially children. It would combine legal support, psychological counseling, and education programs to help prevent vulnerable people from being drawn into similar groups in the future. She knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be bureaucratic hurdles, funding issues, and the ongoing challenge of addressing the root causes that led people to join cults in the first place. But as she thought of Emma's resilience and desire to help others, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The next morning, Sarah presented her plan to Captain Roberts and Agent Foster. Her passion was evident as she outlined her vision for a comprehensive approach to resolving the conflicts created by the cult. "We can't just lock people up and consider the job done," she argued. "We need to heal the wounds this cult has left on our community and prevent it from happening again." Captain Roberts looked skeptical. "It's an ambitious plan, Martinez, but where are we going to get the resources for something like this?" Agent Foster, however, was nodding slowly. "Actually, this aligns with some new federal initiatives. I think we could make a case for funding, especially given the high-profile nature of this case." With Foster's support, Sarah's plan began to take shape. They assembled a team of experts, psychologists, social workers, education specialists, and law enforcement officers. Each brought a unique perspective to the challenge of helping cult victims reintegrate into society and preventing future recruitment. One of the first steps was to create a support group for former cult members. Sarah was surprised to find how many people came forward once they knew help was available. Many had been too ashamed or afraid to seek assistance before. During one of these support group meetings, a former cult member named David shared his story. "I joined because I was lonely, because I wanted to belong somewhere," he said, his voice trembling. "I never thought it would go so far." His words struck a chord with Sarah. She realized that their conflict resolution approach needed to address not just the actions of the cult, but the underlying human needs that made people vulnerable to such groups in the first place. Working with local community centers and schools, they developed programs to foster a sense of belonging and purpose, particularly for at-risk youth. Emma, true to her word, became involved in these efforts, sharing her story with other children and helping them understand the dangers of manipulation and undue influence. The road to resolution was not without its challenges. Some community members, angry and frightened by what had happened, called for harsher punishments and less focus on rehabilitation. Sarah found herself having to defend her approach repeatedly, sometimes in the face of hostile town hall meetings. One particularly difficult moment came when a parent whose child had been victimized by the cult confronted Sarah after a community meeting. "How can you waste resources trying to help these monsters?" the woman demanded, tears in her eyes. "They don't deserve it." Sarah took a deep breath, reminding herself of the larger goal. "I understand your pain," she said gently. "But if we don't address why people join these groups, we'll never stop it from happening again. We're not just helping the former cult members, we're protecting future potential victims." Slowly, as their efforts began to show results, the tide of public opinion began to turn. Former cult members successfully reintegrated into society, became powerful advocates for the program. The number of at-risk individuals seeking help before becoming involved in dangerous groups increased. Perhaps the most significant moment in their conflict resolution attempt came 6 months into the program. Mrs. Thompson, who had been undergoing intensive therapy in a secure psychiatric facility, asked to meet with Sarah. Sarah entered the meeting room with trepidation, unsure of what to expect. Mrs. Thompson looked pale and drawn, but her eyes were clear, clearer than Sarah had ever seen them. "I wanted to thank you," Mrs. Thompson said softly, "not just for stopping me, but for helping Emma, for trying to understand why this happened. I know it doesn't change what I did, but I'm starting to understand myself now, and I want to help, if I can, to prevent others from going down the same path." As Sarah left the facility that day, she felt a complex mix of emotions. The conflict was far from fully resolved. There would always be those seeking to exploit the vulnerable, always be wounds that needed healing. But for the first time since that fateful 911 call, she felt they were on the right path. The comprehensive approach they had developed, combining law enforcement, mental health support, education, and community engagement, was making a real difference. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start, a way to address the complex roots of the problem rather than just its symptoms. As Sarah drove back to Millbrook, she reflected on how far they had come and how far they still had to go. The conflict resolution attempt had transformed not just the community, but Sarah herself. She had learned to see beyond black and white, to understand the shades of gray in human nature, and the power of compassion in healing even the deepest wounds. The success of Sarah's comprehensive approach to addressing the aftermath of the cult activity marked a significant turning point, not just for the case, but for Sarah's career and the entire Millbrook community. What had started as a horrific crime had led to the development of a model program for cult prevention and victim rehabilitation. 1 year after the initial 911 call, Sarah found herself standing before a panel of experts at a national law enforcement conference. She had been invited to present on Millbrook's innovative approach to cult-related crimes and community healing. As she looked out at the sea of faces, police officers, FBI agents, social workers, and psychologists from across the country, Sarah felt a mix of pride and humility. The turning point, she began, came when we realized that traditional law enforcement methods alone weren't enough. We needed to address the root causes, to heal the community as a whole. Her presentation was met with keen interest. Agencies from other states began reaching out, asking for guidance on implementing similar programs in their jurisdictions. Sarah found herself in the unexpected role of consultant and trainer, traveling to share Millbrook's experiences and lessons learned. This new direction brought both challenges and opportunities. Sarah had to balance her ongoing responsibilities in Millbrook with the demands of her growing national profile. But she also saw the potential to effect change on a much larger scale. Back in Millbrook, the program continued to evolve. Emma, now thriving under the care of her father and with the support of her therapy team, had become an important voice in their youth outreach efforts. Her story of resilience and healing inspired others and helped break down the stigma surrounding cult involvement. The town itself was transforming. The shame and fear that had initially gripped the community in the wake of the cult revelations had given way to a sense of empowerment and unity. Neighborhood watch programs, community support groups, and educational initiatives flourished. As Sarah walked through the town square one crisp autumn morning, she marveled at the changes. The board outside the community center advertised a support group meeting for former cult members. A colorful mural on the side of the library, painted by local teens, proclaimed "Stronger Together" in bold letters. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Foster. "Just got approval for federal funding to expand your program to 3 more states. You're changing the game, Martinez." A smile spread across Sarah's face as she pocketed her phone. The road ahead was still long, the work far from over. But they had found a new direction, a way to turn tragedy into transformation. As she headed towards the police station, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The dark days following that fateful 911 call had led them here, to a place of hope and healing. And she was ready for whatever challenges the new direction might bring. As Sarah prepared for another day at the station, she caught her reflection in the mirror and paused. The woman looking back at her was markedly different from the officer who had responded to Emma's 911 call over a year ago. The changes weren't just physical. Though the stress lines around her eyes had softened somewhat, but ran much deeper. She thought back to the Sarah of a year ago. Dedicated, yes, but also rigid in her thinking, seeing the world in black and white. That Sarah had believed that arresting criminals and closing cases was enough. Now she understood that true justice was a far more complex and nuanced thing. The case had forced her to confront her own biases and assumptions. She had learned to look beyond the surface, to understand the myriad factors that could lead someone down a dark path. This growth hadn't been easy. It had come with sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and difficult self-reflection. Sarah's relationship with Emma had been a catalyst for much of this growth. The young girl's resilience and insight had challenged Sarah's preconceptions about trauma and recovery. Through Emma, Sarah had learned the power of listening, really listening, to those she sought to help. "You don't just solve problems with handcuffs and jail cells," Emma had told her once. "Sometimes people just need someone to hear them." Those words had stuck with Sarah, fundamentally changing her approach to her work and her interactions with the community. Her professional growth had been significant as well. The Sarah of a year ago would have balked at the idea of public speaking or policy development. Now, she found herself comfortable addressing rooms full of experts, advocating for systemic changes in law enforcement approaches to cult activity and victim support. This growth had come with its share of growing pains. There had been moments when Sarah had doubted herself, questioned whether she was the right person to lead this new initiative. But with each small success, each life touched by their program, her confidence had grown. Sarah's perspective on justice had evolved too. She had come to understand that true justice wasn't always about punishment, but often about healing and prevention. The satisfaction she now felt from seeing a former cult member successfully reintegrate into society was as great as any she had ever felt from closing a case. As she drove to the station, Sarah reflected on how her relationships had changed. Her partnership with Mike had deepened, built on a foundation of shared experiences and mutual respect. Her friendship with Agent Foster had opened her eyes to the broader landscape of law enforcement and given her a mentor she deeply admired. Even her relationship with Millbrook itself had transformed. Once just the town she served, it had become a community she was deeply invested in, one whose triumphs and struggles she felt personally. Pulling into the station parking lot, Sarah spotted Emma and her father arriving for one of their regular check-ins. The sight of Emma, smiling and animated as she chatted with her dad, filled Sarah with a profound sense of accomplishment and hope. As she walked into the station, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey of the past year. The pain, the challenges, the moments of doubt, all had contributed to her growth, both as a law enforcement officer and as a human being. She was no longer just a cop doing her job. She had become an agent of change, a voice for the voiceless, and a champion for a more compassionate and effective approach to justice. As she settled at her desk, Sarah felt ready for whatever new challenges the day might bring. She had grown, she had changed, and she was committed to continuing that growth, one day and one case at a time. As the sun set on another day in Millbrook, Sarah stood at the window of her office, looking out over the town she had sworn to protect and serve. The events set in motion by a single 911 call had rippled out, touching countless lives and transforming an entire community. The themes that had defined this journey resonated strongly in her mind. The power of compassion, the importance of looking beyond the surface, the potential for growth and change even in the darkest circumstances. All these had been proven time and again over the past year. Sarah thought of Emma, whose bravery in making that call had not only saved her own life, but had sparked a movement that was now helping others across the country. She thought of Mrs. Thompson, a cautionary tale of how fear and misguided beliefs could lead someone to unthinkable acts, but also a reminder of the possibility of redemption. The complexities of human nature, the fine line between victim and perpetrator, the crucial role of community in both prevention and healing. These were lessons Sarah would carry with her for the rest of her career and her life. As she turned from the window, Sarah's eyes fell on a framed photo on her desk. It showed her, Emma, and a group of smiling teenagers at the opening of Millbrook's new youth center. The image encapsulated everything they had been working towards: hope, healing, and a stronger community. Sarah picked up her badge and gun, preparing to head out for her evening patrol. She knew that there would always be challenges ahead, always be darkness to fight against. But she also knew that with compassion, understanding, and a willingness to grow and change, there was no challenge that couldn't be overcome. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, Sarah felt a sense of purpose and hope. The journey that had begun with a terrified girl's 911 call had led to transformation of a town, of a system, and of Sarah herself. And that journey, she knew, was far from over.